Alright, welcome to our fifth video in our series looking at creating a prototype for our digital solution project. And so in our last video, we looked at transitioning between our slides and starting to access our object library as part of that process. So today we're going to look at the process of adding in our algorithms to our methods and obviously being able to apply those in Python, but also having them interact with our prototype. And so for the purpose of this video and probably the next couple in the process, we will look at focusing on the login user method, as it's the one that forms our initial, I guess the first method that we interact with in our screen. It's not to say that this is the way that you should approach creating your prototype. We always talk about in our digital solutions classes about focusing on the most important methods. So in this case, it would be something like adding the task or viewing the task, so that data input output. We will talk about those because they do factor in the SQL side of things, which we do want to consider. Particularly once we've connected our database and got that up and running. But the login user obviously allows us to look at the Pythonic algorithms rather than those CRUD algorithms, which again are heavily embedded in the SQL side of things. So with our login user method, we have created a pseudocode previously. So just to give everyone a quick rundown. Essentially, when we log in our user, I've obviously called a user login here, a little typo, but we've set the username and password up based on the user input. We have got a test here to check that there's if there's null values, it'll display that error message. But if we're good to go, what we're going to do is look through a user list, and for each row, if we get a match where the username and password matches up, we then want to call our next method. So that's another typo from the previous example. We don't want to display any list. We want to add a task. If not, we'll go to the next row. And once we've finished our for loop, essentially if we haven't got anywhere else, it's because we've got an error. So we're going to display some sort of error message, and then basically what we're saying is we're going to go back and we'll go back and try to log in again because we've been unsuccessful. All right, so I'll just save that before I forget. So one of the great advantages about using pseudocode compared to a more diagrammatic display of our algorithms is we can actually use this to help us with our coding, and by doing that in the form of a comment. So what I like to do when I'm setting up my algorithms, obviously don't need the begin and end, but for everything else, I like to copy it, go to my library and my method. We're not going to be returning true anymore. We're going to be going through this pseudocode. You can see straight away it spits up a whole heap of errors. Oops. Forgot the old shortcut of highlighting and tabbing the whole lot across. All right, so to get rid of all these errors that are coming up, we simply comment. So by adding a hash at the start, just go all the way through. So now we've got them all commented. So now what we can do is we can just tackle this one line at a time. And just to get off to a super quick start, all I'm going to do for this is use the input method in Python just to get some data in there. So enter username. Alright, so we'll get the username and password in there. And so I guess essentially what we're doing in a sense is bypassing the interface side of things. We really just want to check that our algorithm is working first before we get too deep in the weeds on that. So a good way is just by using the input and the prints. So they'll appear down here in the console. We can always check by using the print username and print password that we've actually got that in there. So we can probably move on. Obviously, simple inputs and outputs we should be okay with. Actually, I just realised I've put this in the log out method. That was a bit of a silly error. So let's cut, paste what we just did. With log out, we'll return true because again, we always want to log out. So our if statements, we've seen a couple of these before in our previous. So equals null, you can have that. So double equals and our single quotation marks. There's also a string method. There is not. I've forgotten off the top of my head, so we'll just stick with what we know for the purpose of this demo. We display an error message, so we can just print statement username is blank. Obviously, we would want to display this on our screen when we get into interactive interface. We can do an else if here. We could potentially just do another if, but I've got else if here. So I'll stick to what we've got because I guess the username and password being blank isn't necessarily independent of each other. That's not else if, is it? It's elif. So in that case, we'll say elif password is blank. So this I guess, else if type structure is, I guess, one of the things we want to potentially consider. You could look at things like nested structures where it sits within. If the first one is true, then we'll check if the second one is true. As I said, they could also be independent if statements because they're not reliant on each other. But just to show you some of the different code, we've got an elif there. So I've sort of broken the pattern there. So else is quite simply just else. And then because everything happens inside the for loop, that's why everything has been indented. So for a row in our user list, so this is very much the same as what's there. So another if statement. So if our username, so I guess it doesn't particularly matter which order we go in, but we want it to equal the row on the user list, so the user within that. Actually, it won't be a dot, it'll be in brackets because it'll be from our user list dictionary. So this is another coding construct that we've considered earlier. So we want our user list to be a list of dictionaries, the dictionary containing each user and their attributes. This is all coming from the database. And so we can't put them together because we want them both to be true. Again, you could have a nested if statement, but because, again, we want them to both occur at the same time. So username and password equals the row and its password. So here we've got the call add task, but previously we talked about that the add task comes in when we load that screen. So what we can do here is this is where we want to return the true value. So return that this is true. We now have the username and password, so we can then go and have them add a task. So you can see here we've got else next row. We don't actually need to add those in. That's just more for our information to say if it's not true, we'll go to the next row. So the loop will automatically do that if this is not true. All right, and then once we've ended our loop, which obviously should be back here a bit because it's not happening inside the loop. We want to display user error. So again, we'll just start with the print. So login failed. And call user login. So basically all we're going to say there is return false. All right, so what happens is if we get to this stage, it says that that's false. So our login success will equal false. And then basically that will just stay in the login screen. We don't have to recall it and reload everything. You could potentially look at things like clearing the text boxes, but we will look at that once we start interacting with the user list. Interacting with the interface. I'm a bit ahead of myself there, because you might see that when you save it all, there is a little error here with user list, and that's because we haven't defined it yet. And so basically our user list is going to be derived from our database ultimately. But for the purposes of testing, all right, we're going to pass that in. So under login user, we're going to say self. We're also going to say that the user list is going to be provided, and it has a capital L. So user list. So we're going to pass in the user list that refers to when we log in our user. All right, so save that. It still says there's an error. Expected colons there, 935. Oh, it's just because I didn't put that there. There you go. So colon at the end of the if statement. Save that. So it looks like we're not getting any errors. So the only thing now is that we need to put our user list in when we call our method. So in the main function, see we've got login successes based on logging in the user. But we don't currently have our user list set up. Right, so what we're going to do, as we said, we want it to use a list of dictionaries. So each item in the list is a dictionary containing that item. So what we're going to do is create a list. And the list is the square brackets in Python. And then inside that, we're going to add a set of curly brackets to define our dictionary. So how a dictionary works is that each value that's in the dictionary needs an associated key. Okay, so what we're going to do, just for the purpose of this, is we're going to say user, need it in quotes, so username as the key value. We then have a colon, and we'll just say John for the user. We can then separate each dictionary item by a comma. We also want a password. And the value that goes with that is, we'll just say ABC. Keep it nice and simple. All right, so now we have a user list which contains one username and password combination. So now we should only be able to move to the next task once we've put in the username of John and the password ABC. Alright, so now if we run our code to test this out, it all loads, which means there's no syntax errors, which is fantastic. Potentially just logical errors. Alright, so if we press login now, can you see it gives us the username here in the console. So we're not interacting with the interface elements yet, but we'll try the blank ones. It says username is blank, and that doesn't really do anything. We get stuck in a bit of a loop. Okay, so let's reset. Let's test it for when it works. So again, I'll just bring it over here so you can see when I press the button. So username, we want it to be John. ABC, so you can see it's giving us the username and password. And then nothing is happening. Well, actually it is, sorry, because I wasn't watching the screen. So because we've put in the right combination, it has given us the planner screen. So let's go back. All right, and so I'll try logging in again because I logged out. This time we'll say Brett, even use the right password. It says login failed, and we're still on the login screen. All right, so it does do exactly what we told it to do. We've now applied our algorithm by adding in our Python code. All right, so you can see the assignments or the set pseudocode by simply creating a variable. And in this case, we're just using the input in the console. All right, our display, simple print messages at this point in time, but also our if, elifs, else's, for loops. All right, and then our, I guess, mostly somewhat complex if statement, because both conditions need to be true. And also a potential for failure. All right, so now that we've established that our algorithm works, what we can do is to tie in our interface features with our algorithm, which is what we'll look at in the next video.